Hello and welcome to the Football Fanzone, the football show where fans' opinions matter. I'm Dan Levine, I'm joined today by David Udo and Peter Donaldson. With the world's most popular league about to kick off again, we take a look at some of the key fixtures ahead.
Newcastle versus Manchester City. Champions Manchester City will be looking to make a statement against Newcastle after their humbling defeat to Arsenal in the Community Shield. Burnley versus Chelsea. Premier League newcomers face a baptism of fire against the powerhouse that is Chelsea. And we also take an in-depth look at the increasing presence of African players in the Premier League.
So first, let's take a look at Manchester City as they begin their title defence away to Newcastle.
Manchester City were deserving winners last season, but a 3-0 Community Shield defeat to Arsenal means Newcastle probably sense that a win at St James's Park is within reach.
So Manchester City have something to prove and Newcastle have nothing to lose. Could that work in the Magpies' favour?
Well, I think I'd probably disagree with you, to be honest. I think Newcastle probably have everything to prove. They've signed a heck of a lot of players. Newcastle lurched into the final furlong of last season. And yeah, I think Alan Pardew's really got to hit the ground running. Not ideal that they play Manchester City on the first weekend of the Barclays Premier League season. But, you know, they need to stand up and be counted. The back four's barely been touched when it comes to new signings. And I think players like Colaccini, who's had a pretty torrid pre-season, and Stephen Taylor really need to they need to hit the ground running and you know, put in some kind of performance against a really strong forward line from Manchester City.
David, do you think City's lack of fitness is going to be a bit of an issue?
Not really. I mean, you saw last weekend they were hammered by Arsenal 3-0 in the Community Shield, but they were using that as a pre-season game. I mean, half the players seemed to turn up with a Game Boy in their hand and stood on the halfway line as Arsenal tried to show off. Same happened at the start of last season when Arsenal hammered Manchester City in a pre-season friendly because Arsenal wanted to prove a point. Pellegrini's a very, very good manager and Manchester City have got a massive squad. There's an awful lot of worry about Sergio Aguero in the sense that he's had this niggly hamstring throughout the course of the World Cup and he's still got it at the moment. If they don't have him, they've got Dzeko, they've got Negredo, who'd walk into any Premier League team. I don't think there's a problem with the fitness. If anything, they use the Community Shield as a sign of the level they need to go to.
Looking at the Forza stats, the City fans seem relatively happy with their manager, only 67% though. Happy with him, which when compared with Newcastle, who famously have got a manager that the fans really don't like, in Alan Pardew, 61% of fans there are in favour of him. Do you think...
I wouldn't mind taking a read after the Manchester City match, see where that is, to be honest.
Do you think there's an obvious plan of attack for Newcastle going into this?
I think players like Riviere and Cabella have played really, really well pre-season. Riviere's scored 3 or 4 really, really decent goals. Cabella's looked like that kind of Cabaye kind of forward line midfielder, almost like a kind of a number 10 kind of player. I think Newcastle looked really, really good pre-season, and it's up to them to really go for the throat. I think against Manchester City, there's no point in just parking the bus, and it is on television that people are going to be watching. So I think they need to really, really hit the ground running.
I agree completely. I mean, a lot of the signings, they're unknown, and I think that's a huge benefit. I mean, look what Swansea did a couple of years ago with Michu, this mid-table guy from Spain who no one's ever heard of. He can't be good, and then he turns out he scores 23 goals. He's great. Everyone wants him. Arsenal wants him. Chelsea wants him. And then he got found out and he's been sent on loan somewhere. But no one's heard of Perez, Ferreira, Riviere. Cabella will be a straightforward replacement for Cabaye, which Newcastle desperately need. And the Manchester City defence, who may be without company, I mean, they're playing against unknowns. Anything can happen. I wouldn't be surprised if Newcastle got a goal up.
So, big opening day fixture. What are your predictions for the score?
A Newcastle sleepwalking performance to a 2-0 defeat, I think, to a certain extent.
I think they'll get a goal and it'll be 2-1, but it'll be a last-minute winner from someone like David Silva and have Pete punching his table.
I can see City turning it on after a poor start in the Community Shield, and I'd go 3-1.
Yeah.
So an opener for the champions that could prove problematic. Elsewhere in the league, things seem a little more one-sided.
On Monday, Burnley hosts Chelsea at Turf Moor in a daunting opener for the Premier League newcomers. The Forza fans are very clear in their belief that this should be a walkover for Chelsea, with 89% of the Forza fans voting in their favour. But Burnley have a reputation as giant killers. Could we have an upset on our hands?
So, on paper this looks like a foregone conclusion, but can Burnley pull off a shock result?
Maybe. For me, they're identical to Blackpool. They've got experienced players, they're largely unknown, they're in the Premier League unexpectedly, they're going to treat every game like Christmas or the FA Cup final, going to have a brilliant first half of the season, but then they'll be found out. I mean, they'll be like top 10 by Christmas. Sean Dyche quite rightly being credited for all the work he's done, but everyone realises, no, they're a team of nobody, they'll get beaten by everyone and they'll get relegated in the middle of April. So
Dyche is an interesting point because the Burnley fans seem happier with him than any other set of fans in the Premier League. 89% think he's the right manager for Burnley, which is more than even Jose Mourinho at Chelsea. 85% there. That's astonishing, isn't it?
I mean, as they should be, really. You know, he brought them into the Barclays Premier League. It's an exciting time for Burnley fans, but I think the signings they've made, Sordell, a player who's kind of completely lost any sort of hunger he may have had. You got Matt Taylor, solid, versatile. Is he going to set the Premier League alight? Well, he's already proved that he doesn't do that. He scores the odd wonder goal every now and again. I think that their tactics against Chelsea should be just park the bus, defend, try and beat them on the counter-attack, just as Chelsea play themselves, I guess. Gilks is quite an interesting competitive goalkeeper as well. I'd like to see him play in the Premier League again. And yeah, it's an exciting time for Burnley fans, but I just hope they can get a couple more players into their squad before the start of the end of the transfer window.
What sort of resolve do you expect them to have against a Chelsea team that's got quite on fire in pre-season? Cesc Fabregas, you know, he's really going to dictate the pace of this game, isn't he?
I would have thought so. To say that my beloved Arsenal turned down Cesc Fabregas caused a nightmare would be an understatement, and he's going to do great. But football being football and Monday night football being what it is, I can almost guarantee that Burnley are going to go 1-0 up with a goal from a corner, probably Lukas Jukovic on his debut, walks away with a celebration, something like that. But then Chelsea will score 5 goals at the other end, shared between Costa and Fabregas.
Can you replace Lampard almost like for like?
I think he's a slightly less hard-working player. I don't think he'll defend quite as much as Frank Lampard. He won't sort of pull the players out from the bootstrings and run out from just in front of the centre backs. But I think he's one of those industrious, kind of interesting players that I think people are going to be scared of, and use him as a target man up top to a certain extent, and everything good I think this season will come through that player. Up
at Burnley, I expect to see Fabregas running at the defence, trying to be the last man in the box, that sort of thing. I think it might be slightly different when you go to Eastlands against Manchester City. Maybe see him in the engine room a little bit further back. The sort of performance that Chelsea put in against City in the Premier League earlier in the season. The Forza fans think Chelsea will be champions at the end of the season, and they think Burnley will be very last place. So how does that impact on your predictions for the game?
I think very little, to be honest. Very little, in that I still think they're going to completely hammer Burnley. I think Chelsea have shown pre-season that they're a team on form. There's players like Fernando Torres who haven't really had a great pre-season, but then you know the other players have picked up the slack.
Score?
I would go 3-1 Chelsea.
Okay.
I agree with everything that Pete said, to be honest, although the signing of Costa, I mean, to say that helps them is an understatement. He's a brilliant centre-forward. And Eto'o did as hard as he could, and Torres, the way he does his hair is magnificent, but the footballing side is a downside. But for me, they're going to finish first. I think you can almost guarantee that, whether I like it or not. For Monday night, 5-1.
5-1, okay. Wow. Bold.
I think so.
I think it'd be an awful lot more compact a game than that. I can't see it raining goals from Chelsea. 2-1 Chelsea, I think. So, with all those big signings at the Bridge, one for sure stands out. The return of Chelsea hero Didier Drogba is a reminder of just how integral African players have become in the Premier League, and a reminder of how far the continent has come in footballing terms.
In the first Premier League season, Efan Ekoku, Georgian Dar and Bruce Grobbelaar were the only African players, but this was set to change dramatically. As the years have passed, we've seen the likes of Nkwanu Kanu, Lucas Radebe, Benny McCarthy, Michael Essien, Kolo Toure, Yaya Toure, Samuel Eto'o, and of course Didier Drogba. As the quality has risen, so have the number of signings. With over 30 African players in the Premier League this season, who are the cream of the crop?
Well, to stop me simply waxing lyrical about Drogba for the rest of the show, I'll hand this over to you two. Who do you see as the most influential African players in the Premier League this season?
For me, the fact that on Wednesday night Roberto Martinez took Christian Atsu on a season-long loan from Chelsea for Everton, I think that's a big signing. The guy's two-footed, he's pacey, he's exciting, and if you've got him tearing down the wings and putting crosses in for your centre forwards, I mean, I'd snatch him in a heartbeat. Another guy that I think is great and incredibly underrated is Nigeria's Victor Wanyama, who's at Southampton, who is a beast of a defensive midfielder. And if Arsenal fail in getting Sami Khedira or Carvalho from Portugal, and we have to rely on Wanyama, that'd be fine with me.
The Premier League has more African players than La Liga, than the Bundesliga, than basically any European league.
Oh, completely. I mean, yeah, you do have people like Victor Wanyama who they're made for the pace and physicality of English football. But you look at people like Kanu, who we had at Arsenal and at West Brom, who was a real showbiz guy and scored some spectacular and ridiculous goals. Adel Taarabt, who's currently at QPR, who I think's got an awful lot more to give than people give him credit for. And the reason why AC Milan got him on loan last season, I mean, that tells you an awful lot. There's something there.
So if I had to push you, who is your favourite African player and why?
I think back in the day, if I was going to extend it to back in the day, my heart would go with someone like Tony Yeboah, a Ghanaian hero, and I think my brain would probably go for someone like George Weah, one of the strongest footballers I think we've ever seen. A man who was just raw football, you know, very little previous training, came to the European League under Arsene Wenger, I think it was, and just set the world alight. A true statesman of the game. He's one of my all-time heroes, easily in my top 10 footballers. But if we're talking about the Premier League, I'm going to have to go with Yaya Toure again. I think he's going to have an incredible season.
I'm a massive fan of Yaya myself. I'd love to see him in my team, Chelsea. But you know, how about yourself? Top African player?
Oh, I could speak about 6 or 7, but you know, if there's any way I could get Yaya Toure at Arsenal, or go back in time and get Arsenal to take him when they had him on trial from Beveren, that'd be great. I mean, he's the most complete midfielder in the Premier League. The world is crazy about Arturo Vidal, who's a seminal player, but he's half the player of Yaya Toure in terms of quality and height. But, you know, aside from him, I'd take Wilfried Boney from Swansea. A friend of mine's a season ticket holder there and thinks he's overrated. But, I mean, in the role that Giroud plays at Arsenal, I'd have him there in a heartbeat. Yeah. Of all time, for sheer comedy value, it has to be Kanu in some of his goals. And nothing will replace Emmanuel Eboué in non-football ways.
From my point of view, fantastic to have Didier Drogba back in the Premier League. An all-time hero and also maybe even a current great. But looking at you know, some of the Chelsea's crop of Africans, Michael Essien is a man who at one time I think was probably the best midfielder in the world. An incredible talent, just unfortunately so ravaged by injuries. Yeah. His knees have been done so many times, but a real favourite of mine.
And that's the most tragic situation sometimes, where you get these players that are just a class apart from everyone else, but their knees don't hold up, their ankles don't hold up, and they have these niggling injuries that never go away, and it ultimately costs them their entire careers quite young. Well, that's all we have time for this week. Remember, you can download the Forza app and get voting, and you can also tweet us your questions and opinions to @FB_Fanzone. That's it from me, Dan Levine, and these guys, and we'll see you next time in the Fanzone.